Hong Kong today is badly worried and frantically arguing about Hong Kong tomorrow. I read a book a couple of years ago. It's called The Myth of the Rational Voter. Writer's name is Brian Kaplan. The book begins with a little anecdote from an election campaign. A supporter called out at the candidate, "Governor Stevenson, all thinking people are for you." The candidate replied, "But that's not enough. I need a majority." I ran my first election campaign some 17 years ago. I was running for a legislative council seat in the geographic constituency of Kowloon Central. We organized these evening gatherings in the public housing estates in the constituency. The turnout at each of these gatherings could be anything from a few dozen to a couple of hundred. I would go explain my election platform and listen to the people's questions, views, suggestions. One evening, when one of these gatherings came to an end and I was about to leave, a woman came up, stopped me, and pointed a finger rather rudely at me. She said, "You won my vote. You listen to what I want you to do." Well, I was still young and rather arrogant and put off by her rudeness, by her pointing finger. So I cut her short. I pointed the finger back at her and said, "I have told you what I'm going to do. Vote for me or not, it's your choice." She was taken aback, and before she could recover from her shock, I turned and walked away, feeling very pleased with myself. And I continued to feel very pleased with myself throughout the campaign until the results came out. I lost the election. I learned a few lessons from that first election I stood in. And one important thing is you never turn your back on your voter. You must not only hear what they want to say, you must also say what they want to hear. Now, I have been through at least half a dozen elections since my initial defeat. And I have grown, like all other successful candidates in these elections, I have grown into the habit of making election promises. I must have made at least 500 or 600 election promises in the past 15 years or so. The Democrats do it. The Royalists do it. The Radicals do it. The Conservatives do it. They all make election promises. Donald did it when he ran against Alan Young. CY did it when he ran against Henry Tang. And one of the promises CY made was he would give every senior citizen in Hong Kong $2,200 a month. Well, to be more precise, he would give every senior citizen who has the need $2,200. And after he was elected, he had to make good his promise. So the government put forward this old age living allowance scheme by which everyone over the age of 65 in Hong Kong meeting a means test, passing a means test, will be given this extra sum of money. The only problem is another election has taken place after CY was elected, the Legislative Council election. It was in last September. And of course, all the candidates in the election made promises. And what better could you talk about than to tell the people that you can make sure the government will do more than what CY has promised? So the government wants to put a means test, to include a means test in this new old age living allowance. We would tell our voters, look, senior citizens, you have labored all your life for the prosperity of Hong Kong. What do you want? What do you deserve? Do you have to prove yourself poor in order to get a little more fruit money from the government? No. You don't need the government's pity. You deserve the government's respect. It is respect. This small sum of additional money is for the respect of the senior citizen. So no means test. Applause. Applause from the audience. Some candidates who refrained from talking about this new old age allowance were forced to show their stand at the election platforms. And let me tell you this. On election day, it was the 9th of September, when I went around the various ballot stations, I was approached by many elderly people. They came up to me and said, look, Mr. Zhang, I have voted for you. I've just voted for you. But promise me, the first thing you do after you return to the LegCo, tell the government to lift this means test. Okay? So that's what most of the geographically elected, popular elected members in the LegCo had to do when the government came forward with this financial proposal. Well, of course, the government carried out opinion surveys. And all the opinion surveys indicate consistently that a majority of Hong Kong people believe that a means test is necessary. The means test is right. It is the right policy to impose a means test. It doesn't make any sense to dole out $2,000 to people like Li Ka-shing, right? People who don't need it. And the government says, even with the means test, the new scheme would mean, for the current year, an additional expenditure amounting to 6.2 billion Hong Kong dollars. And even if the sum is not increased because of the growing aging population, in 10 years' time, this amount will rise to over 10 billion. It's already quite a large percentage of the total welfare spending of the government. This one single election promise. But the pressure is still on us, on the elected legislators, to force the government to lift that means test altogether. And that is why this filibustering is going on. Now, the finance proposal is still with the LegCo's Finance Committee. the committee has already spent nearly 30 hours of their meetings on that proposal without doing anything other than voting on Mr. Longhair's ad hoc proposals one by one. You see, because according to the rules procedures, at a finance committee meeting, any member can move a motion without notice. If a member wants to move a motion without notice, first the chairman will have to decide whether that motion is relevant to the matter being discussed. And it is very easy to think of a motion relevant in some way to the matter being discussed. All right? Now, when the chairman decides that it is relevant, then the House would be asked to decide whether that motion can be moved or not. And to decide whether that motion can be moved, we need a vote. And already, that means at least 2 minutes. So it is 2 minutes to reject any meaningless motion. And someone with the creativity of Mr. Longhair can think of at least 1,000 such motions for every meeting. That is why the Finance Committee has never yet been able to do anything other than voting on Mr. Longhair's motions. Well, that's how the filibustering is coming about. But let me tell you this. I was in one of the public parks in Hong Kong at 7 o'clock this morning. That's my habit. Meeting elderly citizens in their morning exercise. And they have very strong views, both for and against the government motion, the government proposal. Some people will come to me and say, well, get done with Longhair, right? Drive him away. Don't let him keep things, don't let him keep the Finance Committee away from voting. We don't want Longhair. Support the government. But others would come and say, look, why doesn't the government relax the means test? Why doesn't the government listen to those of us who do not want to show our bank accounts to the government for examination, to report our income in order to get that extra sum of money? So it is divided. And I believe that the LegCo and its Finance Committee can only reflect these different opinions from the society at large. Now, what I'm going to say is, a question which has been haunting me for some time is, what's going to happen in Hong Kong after we have attained full democracy? Now, by far, the most important task of the current government, the current Hong Kong administration, and the current term of the LegCo is to see to it that the timetable for our move towards full democracy, as promised by the central government, will be realized, will be implemented within the next few years. Because according to that timetable, our next chief executive will be elected by universal suffrage in 2017. And then after that, in 2020, the whole Legislative Council, every seat in the Legislative Council is supposed to be elected by universal suffrage. So it will be our final goal of full democracy. Is that going to change the way the government will be constituted? Is that going to change the way the administration will formulate public policies? Let me give you an example. Hong Kong has always been rated a very free economy. Actually, the Heritage Foundation has ranked Hong Kong the freest economy ever since this economic freedom index has been devised. We are the freest economy in the world. And our slogan is, the secret to our economic freedom is, we believe in a big market and a small government. Meaning, above anything else, we keep public expenditure at a very low level. Donald Tsang, the former chief executive, gave us a very clear definition of the small government. He said in one of his policy speeches that he would be willing to discuss with anybody about how much and when the government should intervene in the market, on the basis that public expenditure will not exceed 20% of the GDP. So that's the line drawn. Our public expenditure will never exceed 20% of the GDP. Compare that with the OECD countries, for example. And welfare spending. Even today, social welfare spending is only about 3.5% of our GDP, compared with 15, 18, 20, 30, 35% of their GDP in OECD countries. So that's that. And that's why we can keep our taxes very low. And that, to many people, constitutes the essence of our very friendly business environment. Low taxes, low government spending, minimum intervention in the market. Why can we do this? And why can't nearly all democratic countries in the world? Why isn't America, for example, the freest economy? Or the UK or Scandinavian countries? I come back to the book I mentioned at the beginning, The Myth of the Rational Voter. The book purports to answer one important question. Why do democratically elected governments always make wrong decisions on public policies? The writer gives a very remarkable example. He says, nearly all economies will tell you protectionism is bad, is harmful to a country's long-term economic development. But look at all the democratic countries in the world. You cannot find a democratically elected government that doesn't cling to some protectionism. If you do away with protectionism, you don't get elected at all. That is why, like many of my friends, I'm worried when we move towards full democracy, we have to reckon with the reality that we have to throw away, we have to say goodbye to some of the, what we call core values we have always believed in. Core values that seemed to have contributed to Hong Kong's economic success for such a long time. We may have to kiss goodbye to small government. we may have to kiss goodbye to low taxes. And if experiences in the United States, in Europe, in European countries are really worth looking at, then I think we have to start to worry about Hong Kong's future when we move towards full democracy. Now, no politician in Hong Kong would speak one word against democracy. And I'm not going to do that. But I'm calling upon my friends in Hong Kong to think of the problems we have to tackle, the problems that inevitably will come when we move towards full democracy. I do not think we have given enough thought to those problems. Thank you.